Well, welcome back, and thanks for being with us here on Morning Live. Just a quick look, Leanne getting ready to take on an interview with the MDDA about the upcoming local government elections, and also in terms of just community broadcasting, community services in that regard. How have they fared, the mandate that they have in order to bring that to us for the local government elections, and some conversation that I'm really, really interested in, because it would be interesting to hear from you as well what your experience has been. Is it any different from the local community services to a national service such as the SABC as an example? Well, Leanne has that conversation for you. Over to you, Lee.
Indeed, thanks very much, Sakina. Very important conversation. So the upcoming local government elections, which really are just under 2 weeks away, require that potential voters are afforded as much access to information as possible in order to make informed decisions regarding which parties to vote for. Most strategically placed to provide this service are the community media institutions, which serve as the first source of information to residents across the country. But has community media been effective in the dissemination of information as the country heads to the polls? Now, what support is there to make sure that residents who rely on such platforms are not left behind? Well, the Media Development and Diversity Agency, that's the MDDA, is a statutory development agency that is supposed to be promoting and ensuring media development and diversity. It's a partnership between the South African government and major print and broadcasting companies to assist in, amongst others, developing community and small commercial media in South Africa. We've got the CEO with us this morning, Zukiswa Potye, who is going to be talking to us more about the importance of community media in the period leading up to the elections. It is so good to have you here. Thanks and welcome to Morning Live.
Good morning, and thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's an absolute pleasure for such an important conversation. It really is. I mean, we've got such few days left to get to the local government elections. And the reality is you can see political parties. I mean, that's all that we're covering in our news bulletins here. Political parties out and about, rallies, trying to get to as many voters as they possibly can. But,
Yes.
We talk about that access to information. Before we even get there, let's talk about the role of the MDDA in allowing South Africans to get access to information.
The role of the MDDA is really a very important one, because you'd recall that the MDDA itself was established to ensure that there's a conducive environment for community media development and media transformation, a plurality of the voices. So we pride ourselves as the MDDA having that niche market, which ensures that those that could not be reached by the commercial and public broadcaster, people in rural areas, do receive information and news in the languages they speak and the languages that they understand. And so what do we do as the MDDA during the elections? And how do we empower these powerful media houses that carry the message of government and carry message from the ground to the people on how the elections should work? We do that through an elections training that we conduct every time there's an election, whether it's local or national general election. We have just held the training last week, in the past week, for this local government, and so that's what we do as the MDDA. We empower them with the training on elections training. That is to ensure that the stations themselves and our newspapers adhere with the reporting regulations in as far as the IEC is concerned, and regulations in as far as their broadcast licenses are concerned. They educate voters on how to exercise their democratic right. They report on the development of an election campaign. They provide a platform for the political parties and candidates to communicate. Ours is very much for public participation, but also telling our story at the localities where things are happening on the ground. Thank you.
Yeah. So, do you think community media has done enough to ensure that all voters have access to information for these upcoming local government elections?
We strive to make sure that they do. there's always a room for improvement. We've got more than 280 community radio stations that are licensed. We've got about 6 community television that are licensed. We've got more than 200 independent publishers, including digital and community media. And so even in our training, giving the limited budget, what we do, we seek to train a few number of each of these entities, and we hope that they would empower their colleagues in return. So your question, to answer your question, yes, we think they are poised and they are ready to report fairly on the coming local government elections and within the prescripts and within the regulations. However, I am certain that we can do much more better with more resources.
I mean, when we look at local government elections, community radio is, any community media is probably the most powerful source to get to different communities, because you are there, you're in the heart of speaking to the issues that affect you. Here at the SABC, we have got obviously lots of reporters that go out. We've got the country covered, but when you operate on a daily basis inside a community that you know exceptionally well, and that is really where you're broadcasting from, and that is who and what you know, the ins and outs. It's where you live, it's where you breathe, it's where you get services or don't get services. And that's why these are so important when it comes to the decisions. So, how is it that the MDDA actually capacitates community media, helps them, particularly with funding?
Leanne, the funding matter is a matter for another day, really. The MDDA is going to be embarking on a fundraising process. We've just gotten a strategy approved. But what we're also grappling with and we're trying to work around is a sustainability model. So the organization has just appointed a service provider, research organization, that will actually delve deeper into the root causes for the lack of sustainability in the sector. You would know that the MDDA was formed in partnership with government and major print and major broadcasters. However, the major broadcasters' funding or support towards the MDDA got legislated through the Universal Access Levy, the USAF levy. And so they are compelled to pay a 0.2% of their annual turnover to either MDDA or to ICASA, and most of them pay towards us. And that budget amounts for about 64% of our total budget as the MDDA. We do get an appropriation from the government. It is about 33%. And what we lost, Leanne, is the money or support that we were supposed to get from the major print houses. So we are crippling. We are really struggling with funding, and that is the reason why we're going to be going around in the month of November. Starting there, the Act allows for the MDDA, in terms of sources of funding, to also obtain or lobby for funding from international donors, and that is where we are saying we're going to ask and plead with our current minister, because the late Minister Mthembu had said he will champion that leg of looking for funding from the international community. So indeed, we do need all hands on deck. We do need a lot of support, and we thank the current funders of the MDDA. However, we are never able to fund everyone who applies at any round whenever we open for funding. That's what is currently happening now, Leanne.
Yeah, and it's so important, particularly when you look at indigenous community radio stations. I mean,
yes,
it is so vital. It is so important. I don't think we can emphasize it enough, that really is the heart of communities. It's an important thing that this gets enough attention.
Oh, certainly. Certainly. Otherwise, there would have been no need for all the civil society and the government and all the people that came together back in the day, in the 80s, in fact, to talk about the creation or establishment of this important third tier of the community or media landscape in South Africa, because we've got the commercial, we've got the public broadcaster where you are, and we've got the community media, which is the third tier in the media landscape of South Africa. A community media is very key for ensuring that those that did not have a voice during, especially the the apartheid South Africa, are now given voices. We elevating local content. We're ensuring that those voices coming to the fore and people talk about their stories. And so even during the local government election, where national is going to be reporting about national events or even then getting into some local events, but we're expecting our local papers, our local broadcasters to break stories from that ground. Thank you.
So I want to look at now the mandate of these radio stations or these community stations to have a specific amount of election-related coverage. I mean, we know here at the SABC how it does work. There are certain quotas that we need to meet in terms of information and election coverage. Do they have the same quotas that they need to meet?
At this point, Leanne, because I think it's for us, it's learning in progress. We're doing this training, I think, maybe for the 4th time. So we don't necessarily have quotas because that would depend on the number of people we're able to train, depending on the money that we have. What we emphasize to them is how they must ensure that they report on a fair manner and that they allow the debates and that they are not biased, ensure that the information is fact-checked and that they're not reporting on fake news.
Yeah.
Those are the things that we are actually emphasizing with the community media and the small commercial print at the moment.
Yeah. I also want to find out in terms of COVID and the effect that it has had on community media. Because, I mean, if I recall correctly, I mean, I remember it was around about June, July last year where you had community media that were really, really struggling because obviously, you know, I mean, advertising had stopped and you found that people were just not getting paid. They weren't getting money and trying to get that, not to mention what happened in July with one of the community radio stations. I'm sure it was, I think it was in Alexandra when that was, or Soweto. I'm not sure which one it was. You can correct me, but it was destroyed by that. But how many of these community media organizations have we lost from the pandemic and other issues that have surrounded that? And that, of course, is now very detrimental to the communities living there.
So I've got a research unit that is conducting that research of how many we lost during the pandemic. But what we immediately do, Leanne, during the pandemic, as the state president announced the first hard lockdown level 5 in March, on the 28th of March 2020, the MDDA board was able to approve a 20 million emergency relief for the first time in the history of this organization to be disbursed back to the community media and small commercial print. And we did that in small packages of 45,000. But what was key in those packages was that we wanted them to still be able to go and gather news and content. And so 25,000 of that 45,000 was for a car hire for a month with internet, and we gave them money for telecommunications, which was more data and transportation and internet, and we gave them specifically money for PEEs to make sure that they were as safe as possible, but that we wanted them to still be able to continue to do and carry on their mandate of ensuring that the people on the ground, previously disadvantaged groups, that are still able to get the information about how they could possibly save their lives against the pandemic, what it meant, and what were the regulations and rules that were put in place by government. Wash your hands, wear a mask, social distance, but more so in level 5, try and stay at home as much as you can and only leave during essentials. That's what we did. And we were able to then disperse to the first, especially the first 10 million, which we called the first tranche. We were able to disperse those small packages to 114 community radio station and 115 community print. We then, I think in May, we then announced the second tranche, which was the second 10 million. So in terms of buffering them, I remember saying to the late Minister Mthembu, Minister, what is important for us now as the MDDA is to ensure that after the pandemic, we still have our platforms, we still have our vehicle. We still have our community radio stations. That is the reason why we had those 2 tranches of emergency relief, just to buffer them. But remember, we also then went ahead, went beyond that, and we dispersed and called for another application for them in the risk that they were to be switched because they were not going to be able to afford money to pay for Centec. We then again released another call to say those that are struggling with transmission costs, they must come to us. And we're able, again, the board to approve another 18.8 million just for transmission costs. Yeah. And we then did from June up to October, the second tranche of the last 10 million. And that was to just ensure that there's continuity and there's viability. And indeed, we will still have a sector beyond the pandemic. And Leanne, that did not stop or exclude the normal grants. We still provided more than 46 million of normal grants to the sector in 2020. And like we have advertised now, and the board in fact on the 27th, which I think is the next week, will be finalizing the applications for normal grants, seed grant funding, which is in the call of the 2021 year.
All right. Zukiswa, as we wrap this up, the elections are very, very important. And we know that they've been, up and down, and then they were on, then they were off, then they were in the air, and now they're on. And, when we go to the elections on the 1st of November, the results start coming in. People are looking for information in any direction they possibly can. So just once again, in terms of the MDDA supporting community media and helping and ensuring that there is the right news that's going out to these communities, how do you help them, particularly during this time?
So our support does not end only when we've met with them. For instance, as I've said, we've already had the training on reporting on local government elections last week. We also continue to hold their hands. We've got technical experts in the organization that will be on the ground, speaking to the community media entities, assisting them with whatever else that they're struggling with. We've got service providers that are on standby, which have helped us with the training that the community media can refer to. We've left them with some study material that they can use. But more so, we know that we've got the Open Society Foundation that we can always revert back to. We are an entity of the state, so we work very closely with the IEC. We sit in their meetings, we listen to what they do. We are actually having a sister entity called ICASA, which also plays a very big role, but we are ensuring that our entities are empowered to make sure that they follow a free and fair election, and that they're not biased, and that they understand how to fairly report. They allow the candidates and parties to debate with each other, but they also ensure fair and accurate reporting results, and they monitor the counting of the votes, and that they do within the capacity and the training and the expertise that we've given to them.
All right. So, Zukiswa, let's leave it there. Thanks so much for talking to us. Talking about the role.
Thank you very much for having me.
Absolute pleasure. Zukiswa Potye is the Chief Executive Officer of the MDDA, basically talking to us about the importance of community media in these upcoming local government elections. I mean, getting the information out there to these communities, and also ensuring what happens when the results come out, people wanting information, and that's where this does come into play. All right. The time now is on.